And let me just put in that. Okay. So welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar hosted by the Organization Development and Change and Workforce Education Development Program at Penn State University. As all of you know, this is a monthly free webinar series presented during our lunch hour. My name is Isa Al-Balushi. I'm a PhD holder in the Workforce Education and Development Program at Penn State University. I'll be moderating today's webinar along with my colleague, Jose Sandoval, who is also a PhD candidate in Learning Design and Technology Program at Penn State University. In terms of interactive format of this webinar, please use the chat feature in the Zoom platform. If you have any questions about the presentation, please use chat feature in Zoom. You can see the chat button at the bottom of the screen. The Q&A session will be at the end of the presentation. Our online Master Professional Studies and Organizational Development and Change are designed for professionals who need the skills and knowledge to effectively lead change in their organizations. Furthermore, there is a Master and PhD programs in Workforce Education Development with a concentration in human resource development and organization development as well. Our program has created a continuous monthly free webinars series with experts around the world. Today, we are presenting a topic, which is OD Essence, Take the Core of Field Forward in the 21st Century, presented by Dr. David Jameson. Dr. Jameson is president of JMC Consulting Group and a retired professor of Organization Development and Change from the University of St. Thomas. He's also a distinguished visiting scholar in 4 other graduate OD programs. He has over 55 years of experience consulting with organizations on leadership, change, strategy, design, and human resource issues. He has served as the president of the National American Society for Training and Development, which is now ATD, and past chair of the Management Consulting Division and Practice Team Committee of the Academy of Management. He has been honored with a Lifetime Achievement Award, Sharing OD Knowledge Award, and Service to the OD Network Award from the Organization Development, the ODN, the Distinguished Scholar Practitioner Career Achievement Award, and Distinguished OD Educator Award from the Academy of Management, and past chair of the Organization Development Education Association. Now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Jameson. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be working with people in graduate programs and the wonderful webinar series that you've created at Penn State. I've really appreciated that. I've been long-term friends with Bill Rothwell and also with Bill Brendel. He and I used to work together at the same university before he went to Penn State. It's an interesting little story. I mean, most people's careers have been often in multiple different areas of interest, and then they land sometimes in OD. I was somewhat lucky in the sense that at 18, I was getting introduced to OD without knowing anything about it from an older fraternity brother that I had at my undergraduate college. And he was just beginning a new position that was called OD in a hospital. And as I listened to it, it was quite interesting. I was currently studying to be an engineer when all this happened, and I was 18, 19, 20. By the time I was 21 and I was ready to graduate, I was so embedded in liking what I was hearing and learning about OD that I completely changed my career. I switched out of engineering and went into business for the second 2 years. And then I decided I had to study OD. And so I started looking for the best programs in the country and was lucky enough to get accepted and went all the way across from Philadelphia all the way out to Los Angeles and went to UCLA, which was a wonderful program back then. It doesn't even exist there anymore, but it was a wonderful program there, and there was founders of the field on the faculty. So that's what gave me a very, very good start. And I say that mostly because in a way my career started with focused in OD when I was very young, and has given me, I'm now in my sixth decade of working in this field. And I've done it both as a consultant, and I've purposely chosen to do it as a professor as well and do a lot of teaching. And so I think that what I wanted to do today, and this is how this presentation came about. Ever since 2000, I've been thinking a lot about how people don't understand OD, and I've been thinking a lot about how many different things get called OD, and yet they don't seem to be quite doing the same thing. And so I wrote a piece about it in someone's book. I forget right now, but I wrote a piece about it which I called "What Makes OD OD." And in some ways, I'm still thinking the same way. What are the core elements and the core practices that make it OD work as opposed to other kinds of change work? Because there are other kinds of change work. And so what I'll be doing today is I'm not going to try to start with the history that I've lived through and all that, because I have tried to do this sometimes just by walking through the history first, but I think it hasn't been the same as what I've been trying to do is use the history I've had plus my actual experiences. 40 of my years were full-time in consulting out in the field, and probably 30 years of it has always had a professorship somewhere. Um, and so I say these things mostly to just say what is the background that I'm drawing this from. And I have been trying to extract what does make ODOD. And especially now as we enter what I call a very different world than the world I was focused on when I was out in the field. That is, there's a lot of things that are different now, and change is very different now. And I think we need leadership that's very different now. And because of all that, what is it about OD that we need to carry forward into the 21st century? So I'm hoping that as I keep modifying this, and I hope this version is close to the end, and I won't keep finding different things. But hopefully we'll have some questions for things that I say that aren't clear enough or whatever, or anything else that you want to have a question about. So what is essence? Well, I call it the intrinsic nature or indispensable qualities of something. Actually, that was out of a definition. My own words are it's the true character that defines something, or something, what something is or what something does. So since the challenge in our field for years has been what is OD? What is OD? Well, this is what I think, if we could all get more clear about the essence, we could be talking about the true character of what we're talking about. That doesn't mean that there's not a lot of other actions and methods that we can do that help an organization. But I'm trying to get the things that are central to using the uniqueness of OD. So the ingredients that must be present or must be used to be considered what you're doing, or what needs to be included to fully execute what you're doing. In other words, if I say I'm doing OD, I now want to test myself against my own view of what is the essence of OD. One of our problems in OD's history is that we took in almost anything and everything along the way. We had a great openness in the field, and we did not have many barriers or criteria along the growth. This is from the 1950s when it started up for the next 80 years or so. And so because of that, we also had way too many techniques that were being created. And every time they got created, subgroups of professionals in the field started to be grouping along with it. And so rather than a unified professional group, we've tended to have a lot of subgroups that have different ways of thinking about their OD work. And I mean, some examples of that would start out by in the beginning, everyone was doing diagnostic OD, and no one even knew that there was a dialogic OD. Then, when that got written and clarified by Bob Marshak and Jervis Bush, when that got clarified, it was really helpful. But it also subdivided part of our profession again, and people started saying, "Okay, well, I'm 100% dialogue," and somebody else said, "Well, I want to stay with the diagnostic that I've learned." So in a way, every time we create something in this field, we seem to not integrate, but we do seem to subdivide. And that's why I think everywhere I've been in the last 30 years is people asking the question about what is OD. And that's a shame because I wish we had done that job better somehow and made that more clear. So I think through the knowledge, practice, and teaching, I had a great education. I had 40 years of 100 different clients, big, small, medium-sized types of organizations, and cut across almost every industry. And then I was been teaching a lot since then, 35 years or so I've been teaching. And I think what I've learned is what makes OD different. That's part of what I'm trying to share with you today, what I think makes OD different. And now I'm adding to that what I believe we need to be doing to be successful, because our track record of change is not 100%. You've probably heard that, but I think we could do better if we are actually doing the things that makes OD different. I've continued working on identifying the core elements that make it up, and like I said, I hope this is closer now. I've organized it just to make it simpler. I organized it into two categories, and the first one I call the meta categories. And what I mean by that is these particular elements of essence are so broad that they oversee all that we do, and we need to have it in our mind and in our body all the time. And because it's part of the constant work we need to be doing. And of course, I start that with the number one thing that actually is either used or not used well, and that is systemic thinking and systemic changing. There are tons and tons of work in OD that are simple projects, and they do not touch the system. And the problem is that's part of why some of the changes aren't actually taking, getting good footing, or they're not actually becoming behavioral changes that the system needs to adjust to in order for people to change. So it covers how we see and understand systems. That is, what do we know about systems? How do we tell in the organization we're in what kind of a system they have, and what are the elements in the system, and how does this system operate in affecting their performance, for example. And so one of the things way to think about this is to identify all elements of a system and to also understand the common characteristics of what all systems do. So if you study just a little bit or read one book on systems theory, you'll get a good sense of the characteristics. But the simple ones are there's a set of elements that are considered in the system, and there's other elements that influence the system from the outside. Number two is when we have those elements, they interact with each other in all kinds of different ways. And some of them have different forms of dependency, meaning some can operate independent from the other, and others can, when they do their work, it completely affects somebody else's work. So if we understand those as basic characteristics, then wherever we're working, we have to see the system that we're in. We have to see what elements are interacting with each other that actually produce the outputs. So that's the very simple version of how to think about systems. And I'm making it the number one meta category because I think when we stop thinking in system ways, we do piecemeal work, and the changes don't always take hold very well. And they certainly don't influence how the system operates. And I think then that means we're just not doing our change at a deep enough level or at a comprehensive enough level. So systemic thinking and systemic changes is a great beginning. And then the thing that comes second to that is and the word intervening, by the way, grew out of the system, the people who did systems work. And intervening into the system is the way we have to think about at least 75-80% of the work we're doing, because we are trying to help the people and the system change in our work. Now the question is, there's thousands of ways to intervene. What's really important is in the systems language, it means coming between. It means coming between elements or coming between people so that you're doing it for a certain purpose. Sometimes it's to loosen the system for it to change. Sometimes it's to influence some parts of the system so that they understand what's going on in the other part of the system. And sometimes it's a matter of trying to get something to move from piecemeal or from an individual piece into a what is the connection to the rest of the system. So intervening, and Ted Schutte wrote a great piece some time ago. It was in one of the handbooks, and he said intervention has large eyes and small eyes. And so basically the simple way to think about it is the large eyes are like the whole change we're trying to make. That's what we're thinking of as the big intervention. But along the pathway, there are dozens and dozens of small eyes along the way. And it starts with the conversations we have with the client. It starts with how we show up, how we influence, how we build relationships, etc. That's a small eye, but it's purposed so that it helps us to build the change happening in this system. So so it's important that we see a need to intervene in a system for one of the various reasons that are listed above, but we have to seriously design for success. That is, we have to think about, what do I think I should do here? Should I bring a bunch of people together in a room, or should I have a one-on-one conference or with one of the leaders? I have to do some strategic, serious designs to say what type of intervention is likely to be successful in what I see here and what I've diagnosed or picked up here. That is, what is this system like? What is this culture like? And if I ignore those two things, then what I try to do to intervene can be a big failure. So the idea here is we have to have the system in our head, and we have to understand the wide range of interventions, and that the interventions are critical to the change process. Third is using yourself as the primary instrument. And this is my last 15 years has been almost entirely focused on use of self work and how important it is. And it's not only important to us in OD, it has been talked about in OD for a long time. But what it means is we take in the data, we make sense of the data, we see the system, we understand the system. And if we do all that well, if we bring our best self to being able to carry that out, we will be much more successful in the change work that we're trying to accomplish. So the idea of using ourself is it starts, I mean, there's a whole there's a whole bunch to learn about that, but the simple things are we have to build our self-awareness. A lot of people think they're very self-aware, but in reality, there's a lot of, if they don't get a lot of feedback, then they really don't know how other people um, experience them, and how like I ask for feedback from a lot of people because I think I said that really well. And somebody might say, well, yeah, I didn't get it. Didn't make sense to me. But if I never get that feedback, I'm going to walk away all the time saying, well, Dave, you did a good job today. And see, and that's why we need to understand, we need to build our own self awareness and we need to reflect on it all the time. But we also need to have trusted partners that can help us see ourselves through their eyes. And it takes two to see one. So, because it takes two to see one, that's central then to what we have to think about doing in our use of self. But I keep this at the mega level because it means we have to be considering everything we do every day in the sense of saying, what can I do to bring my best self to this situation? Some of the situations are pleasant and they're nice and they're fun. Some of the situations are challenging and frightening and difficult. They're all there. And it's our use of self is how do we bring our best self in any of those situations? And how do we develop ourselves along the way? You're getting a great education now. That is one of the pieces that we do. Many people go to skill building workshops because they want to get better at doing something. And what we need to do is keep our own self assessment going as to what do we need in our field? What do I need to be able to do better than I'm doing today? And don't rush yourself. It never happens in a weekend. It's a lifelong journey. And like I said, I'm in my sixth decade now, and there's new things that I'm still learning every month because I'm trying different things and I'm getting much better feedback than I did when I was younger. So so to me, that's the other piece. And so we have to be able to move out of comfort sometimes to exercise the needed intervention. So when we're thinking of the intervention, it's not what makes us comfortable, it's what does this system need at this point. So we're trying to design ourselves, we're trying to use ourselves in the best way we can. The next one is that the extensive change possibilities and targets. As long as we're talking about systems, and systems can be small or large, but they're at least made up of multiple elements. And what's important is we can work on any aspect of that system. I mean, we may learn with some data, we would learn what is it that this system needs in order to improve, in order to make more money, or in order to perform better for their customers, or whatever happens to be the goals. And so when we're trying to make these changes, the other thing that we sometimes leave out is we have to think about the notion called behavioral change. And this is why applied behavioral science was a very strong founding element of OD. That is how do we apply behavioral science in the workplace? So so what's interesting about that is what we want to have is some forms of behavioral change. My belief after this many years is for the most part, without any behavior change, I don't think we have successful change. I think the real measurement of the change in the end is are people doing things differently or are they doing different things? If there's no behavioral change, then it means what we may have done is we may have moved all the chairs, and moved it around, but but the behavior is no different. And I've seen this happen with restructuring all the time. Every time a new leader comes to an organization, they always want to restructure something. And a lot of people think the restructuring carries a lot of power. Well, it does at an individual level because it gives people different titles and different salaries and stuff like that. But what's really important is sometimes you can change the structure and never change people's behaviors. So we have to be thinking a lot about behavioral change. And the other thing that we have learned to pay attention to is be attentive to the processes, because people spend more time thinking about what it is they want to change, not how they're going to change. And process work is all about how it happens. And it turns out that a lot of times the way in which we build the processes, including the right people, getting the right data, making the right changes, and then helping people with those behavioral shifts. That would be the kind of process for change that we need. And so we want to pay closer attention, if we can, to the process aspects of it. Um, and yes, we are players in the what too. We work with clients and we help them decide sometimes what is the goal, what is the outcome that we need. But that alone does not get us the change. Um, so the other category I called guidance. What are the other things that guide us? Think about them as guide rails on a road. That is what keeps us focused in the right ways. And the first one of these that I start with is our value-based guidelines. That is, and I've worked with a lot of the thing about the early history is when it started, and applied behavioral science was the main theory base that people were coming from. They were social psychologists, they were psychologists, and they were also just forms of change agentry, which was trying to deal with how do we get people to behave differently. And so that in the very beginning, all OD was focused on was the human side of the system. And even today, that's how some people think of OD. And I think it did do a great contribution, because back in the 40s and the early 50s when it started, people were not being treated too well at work, and everything was top down, and there was a lot of command and control behaviors, and that was the way in which the organization world ran. So the human side was brought into it. But what really helped OD is later it developed and grew into learning about whole socio-technical systems, meaning, yes, there's a big human side to every organization. And guess what? There's now a big technical side to every organization going with it. And the technical system back then were tools. Now it's computers and AI. So it's different, but it's still a socio-technical system. And and so as soon as it grew at the more systemic level, OD began to expand the arena that they worked in. So they weren't only focused on just the people and their relationships and how well the groups could work, but that was the starting point. And so I've organized all the value studies 5 or 6 times, and I always try to cluster them together. So I have 4 here just as a sample, and you may have your own list of our OD values. But the first one is humanistic thinking and behaviors. That is, we try to behave daily with respect, fairness, equity, well-being for others, giving people opportunities, building trust, building psychological safety, um, and operating with integrity. These are all humanistic thinkings and behaviors, and not everybody does them well. A lot of people call these the soft skills. But the reality is, if every day and in all of your work, you are trying to both do it as best you can, and you're trying to also model it, and you're also trying to pass it on to people in the system, because their system may not be valuing that value at this point. And we think that's one that makes a difference, because it's one thing that helps people to feel more comfortable and more engaged in the work that they need to do. The second one is a sense of participation which today would probably come under the label of inclusions, because the inclusions have come from a different basis, but they mean the same thing. Give my voice an opportunity to be heard. Give me inclusion in the right kind of conversations. Let me bring my expertise and help into the others, into all the things this organization is trying to do. So participation is the word that we were using back in the 60s regularly, and it was even written up as called participative management. And at that time, most of the managers were not very participating. So but now I think if we put it under the new inclusion label, what it means is, how do we bring the knowledge we have, the resources we have, and the energy we have? How do we bring that in to our work and to our problems and to reaching our goals and making our strategies work? So how do we do that? And that's the participation piece. And then there's a learning, development, and growth piece, meaning that people need leaders and organizations to support their learning so that they're able to grow and do different work while they're at this organization. They're not there as just another pair of hands. They're there to become better at their jobs and to be able to help the organization's strategy work better. So that's the learning side of it and the development side of it and the growth side of it, meaning giving people opportunities, giving people chances to move into new jobs, to prepare themselves to be promoted. All that kind of stuff was a third area of values. And then the fourth one grew, I think it grew as we went from the 60s to the 80s, and we're working much more in systems thinking, that we began to pay more attention to what makes the system effective. And so it's it's the idea of helping develop the whole system so that it can be high performing, so that it can be effective in getting its desired outcomes accomplished. And and how can it be a good place for people to work? Because no matter how good you are at hiring people, if they don't stay, you have not built an effective system at all, because that turnover costs a fortune and the new people coming in are always catching up. So system effectiveness covers a lot of things, and it certainly covers how we lead people, the values we use, and the kind of cultures that get created, because now the culture has a big influence on whether or not people enjoy working there. And so if we leave that out, we won't build an effective system very quickly. So here's the part of how we need to pay attention to this. Our values need to be operationalized in practice everywhere we go. So I don't think we've done really a good job of that. I haven't seen even a lot of clear writing about what we're supposed to do with these values. But part of them is the values guide our behavior, but we need to be looking at how are we operationalize it for other people to be able to see these values in action. So they need to see that people are acting humanistic with each other. They need to see that there's new learning opportunities. Just because of the way you've designed your work, people are learning from each other. And so we try to operationalize it. And what's important is, before we start work with anyone, we should really be upfront in designing, how do we want our values to show up here. I can talk about me, I can say I will do this, but that's a small part of it. The other part of it is, how can they feel that the values are being used. So that's the other piece that I think is important here. And alongside of the values is the importance of data. And so data-based guidelines have been part of OD's work from the beginning. And if you read Kurt Lewin's work, who was considered the father of OD, or a lot of different things he's been called, but he was brilliant in those days. Even in the 1930s and 40s, things that he was writing very early. what was so important is every time people gave him a project or asked him to come out of the university and out into the field, he always started with a set of questions. And he said, I don't know what the answer to this is, but I do have some ways to get people engaged, and their data will tell us the story that we need. And that's how he thought about it. It later became called Action Research, and his name is attached to that. And Action Research is still very usable today. But what it's about is it says start with data that gives us a little better reality so that we get past just have people's opinions. I have listened to so many clients in the first week of our work so many times and heard 8,000 different opinions. But when we collected data, we got a different picture, and then that could be shared with all those people. So what we want to be able to do is we want to be able to get place data surfacing first. That is, especially if someone's hiring you and saying, here's what I want you to do. I think I think sometimes we just accept that and we start down that path. But that path is built on whoever is telling you they have some assumptions, they have their history, and they have their ways of making decisions. And if they're the only ones picking it and saying, go do this, I would question it and try to create some data up front, something that allows you to get some of the different perspectives of people, or else you will just walk through somebody else's plan and have it rejected by the rest of the people in the system. I've had that happen. I understand how that works. So part of it is if we can be data based and also not be narcissistic about ourselves and say, well, we already have a gradient. We know exactly what we should do. That doesn't help us if we enter that way or if a leader in the organization is already talking that way. So we don't want to do that. So so we try to find data early on. Doesn't have to be lengthy things. It doesn't have to be huge data collections. A lot of times we can target small areas and get data from certain groups of people that'll give us a more realistic picture, of what's going on. And then how we relate to systems. I use the two terms consultative and partnering. And we don't always do both of those very well because sometimes we get hired as that extra pair of hands. Somebody already has made all the decisions and all they're trying to do is hire somebody to come in and do some work for them. And in my early years, I know I did that. The reality is what I realized from that is you are no longer an influencing change agent because you're simply accepting what they're giving you and you don't know how many assumptions and past history are built into that decision. So sometimes what we want to do is be consultative, meaning that we're not making decisions about the business, but we are there as a person to be able to provide influence to the people who do make those decisions. So so that we also in consultation, we're also trying to bring our expertise, which is always different from the leader's expertise or the client's expertise. They know more than we do about the work they do, but they may not know much about change. And sometimes if this is our background, we bring that expertise and we want it to have influence. And the consultative relationship seems to work well with that, meaning that you're there, you're asking questions, you're making suggestions, you've built a relationship with somebody who will listen to you. And then if you want to elevate that again and even make it better for change, I think of partnering. And the difference between everyday relationships and partnering is when people partner, there's a different level of respect, trust, and openness. So it's the same reason why three people would come together and say, we're going to be partners and build this system. They each probably have different expertise, but together they could make that organization work. Well, I think the same thing is true as somebody leading an organization and somebody being a partner to them, bringing different expertise can also be a very valid and very, very strong way to work. So what we do is we improve the relationship different. We build the relationship different when we move from just consultative to partnering. There's a couple more, I think, here. Custom designing changes. Now, there's thousands of off-the-shelf techniques and methods and books, and a lot of those can be used. A lot of those are very usable, and a lot of them can be used as they are written up, but a lot of them need to be modified because systems are different, cultures are different, and people are different. And so we need to think about whether or not to be custom designing. I did a lot of things by using certain techniques when I started, and I realized every now and then they worked well, and every now and then they didn't work well. And I kept thinking to myself, once I started custom designing, I started making it theirs. I started making it work in their system. And and most of the time, that is because I was working with somebody on the inside closely, so that in fact we were partnering. And custom designing simply means modifying something that already exists, that so it fits in this system and this era. This, like, we're not in 1980 anymore. We're in 2024 now. So the other thing that is good about that is that we need to learn things from the system we're working with, so that that influences what we think is the best way to take change actions. And alongside of this is the bigger piece is as an end result, we want the capabilities of the system to be improved. Now, if you work for one of the major management consulting firms, that's not part of their business model. They're very good at what they do. Their expertise is good, but they are not there to build the capability into the system, because their business model says, I want to come back for more contracts and more money. But the reality is, building capabilities into the system doesn't mean that you don't get to work with them anymore. It means that you're improving what they're able to do for themselves, so that they don't become dependent on you or any other consultant or any other person from outside. But they appreciate what they've learned from you, and they'll find other ways that they want you to work with them. And so the building of the capabilities was always something that we always said, can we leave the client in a better place? We're not here just to do their change. We're here to help them do their change. And those words are very important, because when I started to really understand that, after I got out of my grad school and I got 4 or 5 years into the consulting world, I started to really understand that how we work together on the change was actually the best place for them to learn and actually start doing some of the work themselves. And the more that we did that, the more the capabilities of the system started to grow. So with that, I will try to pause, and I know that's a lot in one place. And I did really want to just focus this one presentation around, can we get closer and closer to what we really think we need to carry forward into this 21st century, because it is really going to be a wild ride, I think, in the change world. There's so much going on at the same time, and we have to get better at this. And the more I've looked at all the different types of change, I still think OD's got the best way to do it if we practice it right. If we do the practice right, I think we're in great shape. So I'll stop there and take it anywhere that you want to go with questions now.
Thank you so much, Dr. Jameson. And still, as we said, as we announced, We can receive any question that you have or anything that you want to just raise to Dr. Mason here. The first question, Dr. Mason, that we got here, what do you see as the core principles of organization development in the 21st century, and how do they differ from the previous eras before this decade, for example? What are the main differences, maybe?
Yeah, the difference is the different. See, what I'm trying to work on is I think the essence is the same. We need to do the same things, but here's what I think is really different in this era. Number one is there's twice as much change happening as used to happen. More of that change is affecting the broader system and not just a department. And then the third thing I think is the speed is driving people crazy, because it's not just that we have three things changing, it's how fast they all want to go. And not that I think we have to follow that 100%, but I do know we need to do speed better than we used to. In the old days, I say OD people took too long collecting data, and and then after they're collecting the data, then they would make a decision with the client on what kind of change to do and all that. But you know what? That was common then because the outside world was more stable. The environment was not rapidly turning on in every sector. Today, we can find changes happening in every sector of the environment, whether it's technical, social, government, political. I mean, they're all changing. And so anytime they have an impact on that system, that means that system is trying to respond to too many changes on the outside, but they're important to make changes around. And so the combination of the amount and the speed and the overlapping is I think what the nature of change is going to be like. And it's how I'm experiencing change nowadays myself. And so I think what we have to do is we may need to use the same essence, the same practices, but we may have to do some of them in different ways. So it's really okay to be creating new methods that'll get groups of people moving faster, or will get people's engagement quicker, because half of the time we fight resistance for months in order to get to the change project. And what we need to do is do a better job up front with people so we're not having to go through all those extra steps. And that's what I would hope we can learn to do, is take our best work forward, but find some new ways that they work faster. Or an example could be, instead of working with the people in one department when you know there's three other departments that are going to be affected, bring all of them together in the first meeting, not the 10th meeting, because then you don't have to resell it every time. So the whole idea of large group methods, which became popular in the 90s, it grew out of being systemic thinking. They started to realize I need players from engineering and HR and legal and some. We all have to be together on this kind of a change. And having two of us in a room making a decision for all those people is crazy, because that's not how they're going to accept it. So get them started together on the front end. And that's how a lot of those large group methods got created. And most of them were using the label, get the whole system in the room. And that means you don't get the whole system in the room, but you get a representative version of the system in the room. And when you can do that, what I loved about doing it, I've done a few with 200 people, 300 people. I was in one big one where we had 500 people in a city. And what's interesting about bringing that all forward is all the perspectives that are floating around the organization, you just brought them into the room. That is what's so helpful in terms of figuring out what's going on in this organization or this system. So that's one way to look at that. And I do think we're in a different era. So I mean, it's a good time to say I'm going to use these values, and I'm going to use some of these other essence elements that I've picked out. but how I do them and who I do them with and how quickly I do them is the part we have to probably change a little bit. So, yeah.
Great. Thank you so much. We have another question here. We're working with multiple teams. Should you custom design for individual teams?
Say that again, individual teams.
Yeah, we're working with multiple teams. Should you custom design for individual teams, like each team separately?
Yes, I think so, because every team has its own cultures in some ways. I mean, they're influenced by the organization culture. They're all influenced by that larger culture, but they have subcultures inside their teams. They have different personality mixes, and I think it's a little bit like the best teamwork that was done in the past was when we understood what the team's purpose was, and whether or not first of all, whether or not they had the right people. And if they did have the right people in the team, then they had to customize, they had to customize what is their best way to do their role in the whole organization, because that team had a purpose that was important to the whole organization. And so what they do is they work out their best way, their processes. They work on their processes and how do we do our work quickly? How do we pass our work to somebody else? How do we give it to them in a good way? All of that stuff does have a combination of, if you're looking across the whole system, then you're thinking about how each of these teams participates in that system. When you're working with the team, you're saying, what is your output that has to happen? And what is the best way for your team to exercise, execute and actually create those outcomes that you need from your team? So I would say that a team can easily customize the way they're going to get their piece of the work done, and that's fine. And that's fine.
Thank you so much. We have another question here. What special challenges do internal OD practitioners face as opposed to those who are external to the
Yeah,
organization?
everybody asks that question. I think it's always been there. I mean, my wishful answer is it shouldn't make any difference at all. But that's my wishful answer. I know it does. So what happens when you're an employee versus not an employee? Um, Depends a little bit on what the culture of leadership is there in terms of whether people have any freedom or any room for their own point of view to be spoken and used in the process. Some places are just a little rigid and they don't want to hear everybody else's ideas. But what I think is important is this. I think people internal have a strong plus and a minus. And I finally learned halfway through my career, I learned I do not want to go in and consult as an outsider if I can't pair somehow with an insider. And the reason I don't want that is because I think the insiders have way more data than we could ever collect or find. They understand how that place operates, and the good and the bad in that, the good and the bad. And so I think what's important is the internal people have some of the best data, but a lot of times when an outside consultant is hired, their voice is not brought into the room. The inside person's voice is not there. So now we're back to, are we bringing the right people into the participation piece? So the first thing I would do is I would start looking at who's being included from the inside, maybe who's being included from the outside, because if we're trying to deal with some kind of a systematic change, we're going to have to deal with any stakeholder that can make or break it. Anybody who has a stake that can make or break it. And some of those people are in our system, and some of those people are outside of our system. And so I think that's one way that it's different. I think sometimes the ground rules or the norms inside the organization keep the voice of some of the insiders too quiet. That is, people are not hearing what they know. And that's why, as an external, I can help to create changing that. I can help to say, I need some people from inside who are going to work closely with me as we design the work that you need to do. And a lot of times, what's interesting is some people who think of these things as just projects, they think I've hired this person, we're paying them, they're going to do it for us. But if I come in and I bring 3 of my people in and we do the work for you, we might get the change. But my experience tells me we never get the change we need because we do not have the ownership of the people who work there every day. So we need to work with people inside to get to the place where they own what it is we're changing. So they own and they want to do it and they're ready to do it. But my God, if we jam it down people's throats, which happens in a lot of organizations, somebody 3 levels higher decides stuff and just says, we're going to do it this way. And then half the people are happy and half the people hate it. So what have we created? So I think that's where we miss the boat a lot. And that's why I think each of these different essence pieces could keep us on the right pathway because they tend to make us think about the involvement of people differently. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. We'll have the last question here because we have common information
Okay.
to share before we end. So the question here: do you think the OD field has devolved because of all people claiming to do OD when not strictly speaking? And I don't see the majority of OD people today possessing the mindset and skills you described.
Yeah. Just say that again. Just say the beginning of that question.
Yeah. Do you think that OD field has devolved because of all
Devolve.
people claiming to do OD when not strictly speaking?
Yes. I think our profession had a few failures. I mean, one is we unified very well. We subdivided very well. That's one issue. And the other issue is I think that that the idea of what is OD became a big question mark for a lot of people is because it was devolving all the time along the way because if one person narrowed it down and saw it as a particular technique, for example, and you'll find this with some of the books that have techniques in them where there's people, and that's the only thing they want to do, and that's the only thing they will do. So they walk into the system knowing what method they're going to. And I say we should not move into a system without learning from the data first and then deciding what we should do. So see, that makes a big difference in our philosophy right there. And part of it is how we learned OD. And I know that over the last 80 years, I mean, the programs in OD have also splintered a bit. They don't all have the same coursework. They don't all have a core. If I could redo it again, I've designed 3 master's programs and I've helped with 2 doctoral programs. And I'm still sometimes not happy about it. If I had a chance, I would go back with my essence and I would make sure the essence is covered in somewhere in every course. So because right now we don't have that. We don't have a core that's being taught by, at 12 universities. The 12 universities have their own curriculum. And so it does mean a little bit about how we've learned OD, but anyway, so yeah, what we want to do is practice it and try it out and I just think with the way things are changing today, I'm not even sure that there's any one way that we're going to make OD work perfectly. But if we try to use a common set of principles and concepts and practices, I think we can do a better job. And I think we can do change better than other people, frankly. So thank you.
Thank you
Thank
so
you very
yeah,
much.
thank you so much. So thank you so much, Dr. Dimension. And on behalf of our ODC Workforce Education Program, we hope that you enjoyed the session today. If we did not get to your question, please send us an email or reach out to the presenter directly via email. For the future webinar, we would like you to hear your feedback on today's webinar. Please take the survey that we shared previously using the link in the chat box. Our next webinar is about learning to soar. The power of our questions make all the difference by Dr. Jackie Stavros on April 26, 2024 from 12 to 1 Eastern timing. Registration for all events are free, as you know, and can be found on our website. You can also find us on our social media platform, such as Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and Twitter. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon. Have a good day and a good night to our guests from other time zones. Thank you so much.
Yes, thank you. Wow, that's great.